Hello, hello, and welcome to Self-Care is Sexy. My name is Chris, and I'll be your host. We're a weekly podcast that's here to generate and share self-care ideas with each other. Last week, we did a show about self-love. I talked about what the fuck it actually is and how to cultivate it. Now, whether you're all about the self-love or if you're hating on yourself, last week's show talks about how to get to a better level and create a better relationship with yourself. If you missed that show and you need some help with not treating yourself like garbage, you can check it out. That was episode 132. What the fuck is self-love anyway? You can check out our show on iTunes, SoundCloud, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Stitcher, Spreaker, Podbean, PodNation, and of course at our website, www.selfcareissexy.com. All right, I want to give you a quick preview of what to expect from today's show. So today's show, we're going to be talking about advocating for your own self-care. We're going to talk about why it's so important that you do advocate for your own self-care, as well as give you some examples of what that means, and then, of course, some real ways that you can make self-care the priority this weekend. But first, a few quick housekeeping notes. First of all, I want to send a quick shout out to April from Wellness with April H. You can find her on Instagram at Wellness with April H. She has a weekly post on Instagram and is hosting a 21-day self-care challenge that you can sign up for. Just follow the link in her bio. But she posted and said that she was listening to the show, and she asked her followers what they were doing right now in their lives for themselves. And I love this because it is so important to remember to check in and ask this question often. So thanks, April. I'm glad you're digging the show. And again, if you want to check her out, it's at Wellness with April H on Instagram. All right, a few quick commercials. We'll be right back. Okay, friends, it's time to chat today. So I want to talk about taking responsibility for our own self-care and advocating for yourself. And a lot of people actually struggle with this. You know, for some, it's really hard to know, like, when it's appropriate to advocate for yourself and, like, exactly how we do that. So a lot of people attribute the inability to advocate for themselves as, like, not knowing what to do for self-care, or thinking that it's not really a priority. Like, we can maybe do that later, or maybe you just feel stuck, like you just can't do self-care right now. And so if standing up for yourself and asking for what you want is uncomfortable, today is your jam. What we're going to do, we're going to break it down and talk, first of all, about why it's so important that you do advocate for your own well-being in all the different areas of your life. And then I'm going to give you some real examples of ways that you can start to advocate for yourself, and then share some ways that you can start to make the self-care the priority. All right, so let's start today with just taking stock. You know, we've got to know where we're starting from in order to know what it is we need next. And so, like April's Instagram post, we've got to stop and ask ourselves, what are we doing in our lives that is just for ourselves? Oftentimes, I think a lot of people can genuinely answer that question with nothing. They're not doing anything for themselves. And I want you to really take a moment and reflect on all the things you do on a daily basis, all the priorities, all of the responsibilities, and think about how much of that is actually devoted to your own self, to your self-care, to what you want to do with your life and your time. It's usually the case that if you don't have a lot of time for self-care, or if it's really hard for you to make it a priority, there's something else in the way. There's something taking the place of that. Now, I could go on and on about how social media eats up all of our time, and that there are pockets of time for you to find in your life to do self-care. But none of that really matters if you don't feel like you deserve it, or if you feel like there's a barrier between you and self-care. Like, you're not really allowed to do that thing. So it's really important that you first of all recognize that if you want to take care of yourself, if you want to change the way you treat yourself and the way you think of yourself, you have to stop coming up with all of the reasons you can't. Because really, you are your own biggest barrier to taking the time for yourself, to standing up for yourself, to advocating for yourself. So that's something I really want us to think about is, where are we starting from, right? Like, are we starting from the place that, like, yeah, I get it, self-care is important and I'm willing to do it and I'm going to make it a priority? Or are we starting from that place of, I just don't think I have the time, there's just no way, I've got too many responsibilities, and etc. Because depending on where you're starting, that's going to help you figure out where you're going and how you're going to use this advice to your advantage. So why is it important for us to advocate for our own self-care? Well, first of all, the most important reason that you should stand up for yourself is because advocating for yourself, standing up for yourself, it creates dignity. It creates self-confidence and it creates respect, self-respect. And a lot of us maybe don't think about those things as important priorities in our life, but if you have healthy self-respect and you have healthy self-confidence, your life is completely different than those that don't. When you create a good relationship with yourself and you have a sense of real confidence and real respect for yourself, you do life differently. You really hold yourself to a certain standard and you have your own back. You're constantly coming from that place of, what do I need for myself? How can I fill my own cup before I go out into the world and help others? And that's really the most important reason that you need to stand up for yourself, is to create that dignity, that self-confidence, and that self-respect. Because having those things, not all of us, first of all, not all of us were born with those priorities. Not all of us were given a healthy amount of self-esteem or shown how to have respect for ourselves. And a lot of us had some shitty examples of what not standing up for yourself looks like and the benefits of that. And I could go into that for hours and hours, but really try to remember the only reason we do anything negatively to ourselves is because there's some kind of benefit behind it. And you can dig down that rabbit hole all you want, but the most important thing to remember is that if you haven't had self-respect, if you haven't been creating the kind of relationship with yourself that you want, advocating for yourself will do that. Because advocating for yourself, it really helps you repair any previous damage to your self-esteem. So again, if you grew up in a place where your self-worth was based on what you did for your parents or what you did for the household, or if your self-esteem was based on how you looked or your weight or external things you couldn't control, then you might have some repair work to do. And I think, first of all, we have to recognize that. If advocating for yourself, if standing up for yourself and asking for what you want is super uncomfortable for you, you really do have to look at the fact that you might not have been given all of the tools that you need to really live a fulfilled life. And if you think not having self-esteem is really not that big of a deal, spend an hour with somebody with really low self-esteem and it will correct any thoughts you have about it being null and void. Because if you have low self-esteem, if you don't have self-respect and you're not very confident in yourself, you're going to fall into the victim mode. And advocating for yourself, standing up for yourself, saying what you want, it prevents you from falling into that victim mode. It puts you in charge. When you stand up for yourself and you tell other people that, no, I will not put up with this, or I don't want this, or you say how you feel, I don't like this, etc., these kinds of things, it prevents you from letting something happen to you and then retreating and being like, oh, poor me, I have no control over what's happening. And when you fall into that victim mode and you let other external things control you, you really are living a life without purpose. You're allowing external things steer you this way and that. Whereas when you stand up for yourself and you advocate for yourself, you really are taking power back and you are rejecting that victim mentality. And when you're rejecting that victim mentality and you're standing up for yourself, it helps you to be true to yourself and to cultivate that self-love. You know, we talked about it last week. I gave you a bunch of ways that you can really start to repair that relationship with yourself and build that self-love. And one of the best ways to do that is to advocate for yourself, to say what it is you expect in different situations and with different people in your life, and being able to be true to who you are and what it is you want. You know, if there's something, a burning desire within you to do something with your life, whether it's write a book, be a contestant on Dancing with the Stars, or get on the Ellen Show, or make $1 million, whatever mega dream is on your heart, when you do not advocate for yourself, when you do not stand up for yourself, those dreams seem impossible. Whereas when you do make advocating for yourself a priority, those dreams seem reachable. They seem doable because you start to reinforce believing in yourself. Not to mention that standing up for yourself, it helps all of your relationships, whether they're your romantic relationships or your friendships or your work colleagues. Advocating for yourself, standing up for yourself, it really trains other people how to behave with you. And it's this reciprocal thing that happens. When you start standing up for yourself, when you start saying, this is how I will be treated and I will not accept any less, etc., etc., we'll get to the examples later. When you're doing that, people around you, even if it's a little brash to them, right? Like they're not expecting it from you, they're expecting you to be a doormat like usual, and you take your power back and you say, no, I'm standing up for myself, they are going to see it and it's going to be noticeable to them. And maybe that will trigger in them the possibility that they too could say what they wanted, that they too could stand up for themselves. And we've talked about that before. When you do self-care, when you make it a priority to take care of yourself first, when you cultivate self-love and you live from that, people will start to see that example, and it gives them permission to do the same. So, and last but not least, one of the most important things that advocating for yourself can do and standing up for your own self-care is it helps you to be honest with yourself. And I want to take a beat to really talk about this for a second. Now, when we talk about being honest with ourselves, sometimes that veil is really thick and it's really hard to see where our blind spots are. It's hard to see what work we need to do on ourselves and what is bullshit from the exterior world that is not of our concern. It's hard because sometimes those lines are blurred, especially if you have people or relationships in your life that are manipulative and can try and blur those lines. So standing up for yourself and advocating for your own self-care and time for yourself and things of this nature help you to really get to that place where you start to lift that veil. You start to see where it is you need to do your work. Now, I want to run through that list real quick, just in case you missed anything. Why it's important to advocate for your self-care. Number 1, creates dignity, self-confidence, and respect. Number 2, it helps repair previous damage to our self-esteem. Number 3, it prevents us from falling into victim mode. Number 4, it helps us to be true to ourselves and cultivate that self-love. Number 5, it helps our relationships with others. And number 6, it helps you to be honest with yourself. Now, does it ever get easier, right? This was a question that was asked by a listener in a previous discussion about self-care and standing up for ourselves. And the truth is, yeah, it absolutely gets easier. When you start practicing standing up and advocating for yourself, when you start becoming your own best ally, it does become easier, and it becomes second nature to spot the difference between the bullshit someone's trying to use to manipulate you and what's really the work, the stuff that you've got to do to really unlift and uncover the parts